Welcome back to the class, everyone. Over the last couple of years, CG has made an effort, and quite frankly succeeded, at giving most characters in-game a home, and that home then several functions that they can do. And while this has been great for overall game health, it has made things just a little bit confusing and difficult when trying to determine which teams out there are the most essential and really core for your overall roster development. So the purpose of today's video is kind of solving that problem, where we're going to go through and we're going to talk about the 10 most essential and core teams to have when you're starting off building your roster over time, maybe about a year or two in. This is ultimately what we want to be going after, and it is going to seem kind of hefty. This is not like a goal to have in 1 or 2 years, but it is somewhere to at least start as a base point. And before we do just jump into everything, what do we mean when we say core team? And what I really want to make clear is core team doesn't just mean good. If we wanted to talk about good teams, I would just throw Galactic Legends and Conquest characters and Inquisitors and new stuff and Gungans and everything that I, have used in GAC over the last year or two. But that's really not what we mean by core. What we mean by core are these 4 things. Number 1, the teams have to be accessible. They can't be using a lot of the newer stuff that's coming out. They can't all be unaccelerated characters, using Chirotech, or being required for legendary events that aren't already consistently in the journey guide. They also have to be resource oriented. And what I mean by that is, when you get these characters, you have to get a bonus on top of that. We're going to talk a lot about teams that are made for assault battles that are going to yield a lot of resources, whether it be in signal data, Chirotech, Zetas, or whatever it may be, as well as talking about some of the TBs. Number 3 is going to be roster building. We talk about when you get these characters, you should probably also be getting some immediate ROI, but in addition to that, we need to be unlocking more characters, or at least setting ourselves up for success if we ever want to take on a bigger project like a Galactic Legend or one of the really complicated ships like Profundity or Leviathan. And lastly, no Conquest characters, because again, we're going for something that is very accessible. And if you're keeping up to date on Conquest or have all the really good Proving Ground teams, then it's probably not a concern for you. But when we're talking about core, they are a little bit harder to come by because you have to shell out a lot of crystals or have been playing for a really long time. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. First up is going to be Geonosis, and this isn't the exact level you need to get your Geonosis to. Gear 12 across the board is probably a good stopping point, with relics on one of these 2 characters being totally acceptable. And the reason why they are making the list, and by the way, this isn't in any particular order, do this however you want, is because they are such a good early PvP team. And the reason for that isn't just because they're accessible, but when we dig into Geonosis Brood Alpha's leadership, we will see that he's giving the whole team flat health and flat protection. The reason why this is relevant is typically most teams out there, when their leaderships have a health protection or whatever bonus, it is percentage that is meant to grow with the team. So a flat stat like this is typically bad in the end of the game, because once we start looking at the percents of relic characters, this is seemingly below what a normal percent would be. But for a character that's, say, Gear 7, or Gear 8, or Gear 9, or Gear 12, having a flat boost of 15,000 for both of them is going to make a large impact. I mean, if we just go and look at my Poggle over here, who is Gear 12, mind you, he's not super low, he's not purple, 15,000 health and protection would be over 50% gains for his health and close to that for protection, giving him an overall really great boost. And one of the other things that I really do like about this as a core team is it's simple. You can't get Geonosis wrong. You can't farm the wrong one. For me, in the very beginning of the game, I started with Jedi. It was a whole mess. I ended up with Eth Koth. It eventually worked itself out. But for the most part, Geonosis are important because of that, and also just because they're an important TB place for Geonosis. Not just because you can get your 1 Watch Shard, but it kind of shows a lot of the other more committed guilds in the beginning game that you are willing to do your part. You're willing to get the team to be able to get them not only what you want, but in addition, what they want. Next up is going to be the standard Padme team. The last time we did a video similar to this, I did make a point to say that we're not necessarily willing to put the Qui-Gon Jinn team here, because the Qui-Gon Jinn team, while it is great and I absolutely love it, it's amazing, it has a tendency to be more of a 1 game mode hero, being specifically slotted for GAC. And while Kelleron Beck has kind of made the team in general a little bit more universal. He's still a very new character and not as accessible due to chirotechs and a bunch of things like that. So this team, the really core of this team is going to be these four. You don't necessarily need Mace. You can sub in a lot of other GR characters in there. You can use our good friend Barriss Offee. You can use R2-D2 if you don't have our home. 3PO is actually the original 5th slot for this, but he went to do bigger and better things with CLS, who we will be talking about in this as well, as they're very important. But this is going to give you a very similar vibe to that of the TB that we saw with Geonosis, where the team is going to be used several times throughout that entire territory battle. In addition to that, this is really setting you up for success in a variety of Galactic Legend farms that you might get to later on, whether it be JMK, Lord Vader C. There's a lot of overlap in all those categories. In addition to that, they're really not that bad of a conquest team, as they have really good health pools and can take a lot of durability hits. And because of Padme's courage, you don't really have to worry about how much health and protection the enemy is given via whatever broken stats Conquest decides, because they will deal max health damage. So if they're given 500 billion health, 50% of that is still 50% of that, and they can make their way through it. Next up is going to be General Skywalker. Again, this is in no particular order, because General Skywalker is a little bit harder to get even in the beginning game, because he's still locked behind teams that you would probably already need to have somewhat at relics. In addition to that, Chirotech was already required to be able to get him, because you need it for shock. But nonetheless, it is a very good team, and from a PvP perspective, it's one of the few more accessible teams that can actually take out a lot of the newer stuff, like Malicos, like Malgus. Not at 100% win rates, but enough to the point where if you invest enough in it, you can see some pretty good returns as far as overall GAC goes. Not to mention, it's a gateway into Lord Vader. In addition to that, if we're looking from a guild perspective and you're not immediately going right into Roach, you do have the option to use these 4 clones plus Shock T in the cam mission. You don't have to. Bad Batch is also an option, but from a core team perspective, Bad Batch is a very expensive option because of the fact that all 5 of them do need Chirotech. So overall, very good team, mostly on the PvP side, but you can still get some good return on some other PvE areas. Next up is going to be Nightsisters. Nightsisters are a new addition to this list, partially because of Merrin, but also just because they've proven that they are the best for their assault battle. We talked about that kind of in the beginning of the video. They're going to let you max out an area in the game that no other team can, being the Secrets and Shadows assault battle, where Phoenix can also participate, but they can't really get 5 stars or 3 stars, because Nihilus will always annihilate someone, really regardless of how good your Phoenix are overall, at least for that final tier. Merrin also makes the team much better for overall PvP uses, and again, this is it. We're looking at a gateway team into legendaries like Cal Kestis, like General Skywalker that we just talked about, and quite frankly, the team is just really accessible. Most of these characters aren't even on hard nodes, which hard nodes are kind of the middle ground. They're easier than conquest characters or legendaries, but at the same time, being available in one of the shipments that they are, which I believe Asajj Ventress is available in one of them, and then Mother Talzin is definitely a hard node, but there's a little bit more accessibility here when it comes to farming up the characters, that you're not just stuck on a 3-month farm. You can actually get through them at a slightly faster pace. So overall, great team, and also just really fun to play with, both in GAC as well as Territory Wars, despite they don't really have any Territory War Omicrons. Next up is going to be Veers, a team that has kind of fallen off when it comes to the overall PvP perspective of the endgame, but they just do so much for you when you're first starting off. There is, of course, the Galactic Legend overlap with half the team if you are going to use Captain Starkin or Colonel Starkin here for C, but in addition to that, they're going to be able to completely max out not 1, but 2 different assault battles, which is, again, more reoccurring resources that we're going to be getting consistently. Now, if you're looking at this and you're looking, all right, we're kind of breaking the Chirotech rule a little bit, you don't necessarily have to use these 5, and quite frankly, these 2 are the complete core of the team. Dark does add a lot of viability, not just in PvP, but also as well as in PvE. But there is a lot of flexibility. We can use Colonel Starkin here totally because he was required for C. He does do some buffs. He is an Imperial Trooper. He doesn't really break the rules in any way. But in reality, if you, for whatever reason, you geared up Shore Trooper, I'm not sure why you would very early on, but even if you did, you can use a team like this as well that will function. Maybe not quite as well as getting in Dark Trooper, but overall is still going to yield quite a bit of value, despite the fact that you don't have the perfect team. Next up is going to be this bounty hunter team, where obviously in the very beginning of the game, you need something to beat the credit heist, and it doesn't have to be bounty hunters, but it can be, because every single bounty hunter in game is a scoundrel, so you have some really nice overlap from that. In addition, when we were talking before, the core of this team really is these top 3 units. Bosk is your tank / leadership for most things in the beginning, and then Grief and Mando as well. This is your cleanse, this is your turn meter gain. They do require quite a few Zetas, but overall are a really great team. And again, we're looking at a gateway into pretty much most of the legendary characters out there. If you want to put in Zam, because she has a pretty good GAC Omicron, you have a ticket into Lord Vader. Grief and Mando themselves are requirements for BAM. Our good friend Bosk is an Executor requirement. Lord Vader's for JMK. Boba is for the Executor. I think he also overlaps for Jabba. So you just have a lot of characters that you can kind of sub in here. Dengar is also needed for the Executor. That while there might be an overall ideal team of Zam or Jango or whoever, these other Force and Fists can easily slot in here and give you a lot of the freedom to farm what you actually want to farm and still have a good usable team, not just for credit heist, but also for PvP purposes overall. Next up is going to be the Jedi, and the really one important Jedi that I want to point out here, and they're all pretty important, but Jedi Knight Luke is going to allow you to beat the assault battle all the way up until the last tier because of what his leadership does. It's not really all that great in PvP because it's nerfed against Galactic Legends, but he's essentially going to reset the enemy's speed to that of his own, which is not only useful in the assault battle, but it's also really nice for conquest because it doesn't matter how much speed the enemy gets. If they get 500, 600, 700, 800, doesn't matter. If your Jedi Knight Luke is modded at an extremely slow speed like 140, then he reduces the entire enemy to 140. Coupling in characters like Jedi Knight Revan, who have the bonus savior, Jolee for his revives, Bastila, Grandmaster Yoda overall great. These are not the 5 Jedi that you must use, but Jedi Knight Revan does give you a lot more flexibility, especially when using both of them together. You can also make an SLKR counter out of this if you have old Ben and Hoda in place of this Yoda and Jolee. But overall, looking at PvE and PvP viability, this team right here is going to give you a lot of what you need to work with. Next up is going to be CLS, a personal favorite of mine, and I will admit I am biased. I've used this team for a long time. They have helped me out in a number of situations, particularly in PvP, just because every single time it seems like they get a Datacron, they're just suddenly beating a Galactic Legend. But even beyond that, there is overlap for, I believe, half the Galactic Legends out there, if you include 3PO technically being required for Lord Vader because you need him for General Skywalker. And then on top of that, they do have their own assault battle for the Rebels, and they're just a really fun team to use. From a quality of life perspective, to be able to take in your Luke, your Han, and your Chewbacca and just shoot things is a really fun time that I can get behind. Next up is going to be General Skywalker, who again, or not General Skywalker, Grievous, who is, most of his team is required to get General Skywalker. And again, we have other nesting dolls here for other requirements for Galactic Legends. But ultimately, this is just a really nice punch-up team when it comes to PvP. And one of the things that I really like about it for Conquest is there's been this really kind of, I guess it's kind of annoying. There's been one really reoccurring feat for Conquest, and that is where they want you to use no Jedi, no Sith, and no unaligned Force users, which at first doesn't seem that hard, but when you start to look through all your teams and you realize how awkwardly spread out all those factions are, it gets kind of hard to find a team that can do it, and Grievous perfectly matches it. Like if we look at the Emperor Palpatine team, we've got Sith unaligned Force user there. CLS is an unaligned Force user, so you can't use him. Jedi again, I guess you could actually use the Bounty Hunter team and the Imperial Trooper team, but for the most part, Grievous ends up being a really solid addition to that. And one of the other things that I really like about him for Conquest is this is a reactive team, and what I mean by that is they don't have to have high speeds. They have ways of interrupting the enemy's turns, gaining turn meter themselves, and then eventually overcoming them with a ton of attacks. And overall, just a really great team. Next up is going to be Emperor Palpatine, and this team isn't like the best thing ever, nor is it going to get you a ton of resources from a PvE perspective, but it's just really accessible. Mara Jade, even at gear 11 or gear 9, before she's really ready to go, has stealth mechanics, has a really nice, good base speed, and she can help Emperor Palpatine and Darth Vader try to create a loop, and ultimately this will evolve into a Starkiller team at some much later date. But overall, just a lot of solid value and just very accessible. Darth Vader is more or less given to us for free as we progress throughout the game. Then you can even speed that up by using your fleet currency. Royal Guard, very easy to get. Palpatine and Thrawn, all you have to do is farm 5 basic Phoenix characters up. And then Mara Jade's actual node is kind of pesky, but again, she's good even at 3 or 4 stars or whatever it is that you can get her going, because once the turn meter stops, it really just doesn't stop, assuming you're facing the right team. So that is going to make up our top 10 core teams. Again, we're looking at longevity, we're looking at building a roster, we're looking at trying to get the best bang for our buck overall. And if you're wondering why we're doing this video now, since we've already done one that's kind of similar to it, is because the intention here is to actually continue this in somewhat of a farming guide type of series. And if you're wondering why these bottom 5 character / teams weren't shown here, is because they will be showing up at some point in a later video, talking about maybe not necessarily core teams, but other good building block teams to work on after most, if not all, of these have been finished. So thank you guys for watching, and as always, stay awesome.